game development may be a little bit harder than just making games all day.
Game dev is hard.
Game development is hard.
Game development is
Game
hard.
development.
It can't be that hard.
So you want to make games. Maybe you have this idea you know the world would love, or you're struggling to finish that very first game. But game dev is hard, right? I used to think so too. And after many failed attempts, I finally figured out 4 simple steps that helped me break out of the infinite loop of tutorial hell to finally become a game developer. Let me tell you my story of how I use these 4 steps to become a game developer and how you can too. My story didn't start as a prodigy child, knowing how to code before I could recite the alphabet. In fact, I didn't even know I wanted to make games. I knew I loved playing games, but the idea of creating one on my own seemed really scary. It wasn't until I started my corporate job, clocking in and out day after day, and coming home and feeling defeated and depressed, that I knew there was something more. So I faced my fears and Googled how to make games and started learning Unity. I started with tutorials, and at first I felt like a god creating a digital world. That soon wore off because I was missing one of the most important steps, and because of this, I ended up feeling frustrated, bored, and ultimately quitting. A few months would go by and I'd feel inspired, I'd pick it up and try again, only to end up in the same loop of failure. It took me years, but I finally was able to break free by figuring out this first step on how to actually make games.
I thought we were gonna learn how to code, make animations, and cool effects.
I know. Crazy, right? I fell for that trap too, but trust me, the first most important step you can do is understanding what a game loop is and figuring out what your game loop is going to be. Let's take a step back for a second and think about the game you've always wanted to create. For me, it was a top-down shooter with a really funny story. It also had roguelike elements and RPG elements, such as an ability system, power-ups, achievements, just to name a few. You can see how this gets complicated really fast, and if you're learning games or trying to make your first game, you'll probably end up like me, getting overwhelmed and quitting. So what is a game loop, or better known as a core game loop? It is a 5 to 60 second action and reward repeatable sequence. For example, take my dream game of a top-down shooter. The core game loop is a player needs to find and kill an enemy. That's it, that simple. But that seems really boring, you might say. And you're right, but this is important to know how to identify a loop, because if you take all the other features we mentioned earlier, each of those have their own individual game loops as well. In fact, the best games are made up of many game loops working in unison together to create amazing experiences. And when I was finally able to understand the importance of this concept, I was able to write down all the little game loops in my game so that I could focus on each one individually. This first step started the success of my game development journey, but it would have been nothing without the second step. Now I know you're probably on the edge of your seat, ready to start coding and making games, but bear with me because this step is not only important for your first game, but for making every game afterwards. But I think we all can agree, if we focused on one simple game loop, it would be really boring. So how do we break it down to keep the game simple while bulking it up to make it fun? The first way we can enhance our game loop is to make the game, well, an actual game. So to do this, we need a way to start, end, and restart the game. Before we get any further, let's stop and break down all the different components we have in our very simple game loop of starting a game, have a player attacking an enemy, and then ending the game with the ability to restart. One of the first components we'll need is a way to manage all the scenes for starting, ending, and restarting. Next, let's look at the player. We're gonna need some input movement, sound effects, animation, collision, just to name a few. The enemy will need the exact same, but have AI movement and attacking, as well as we'll need a way to manage our win and lose conditions. As you can see, this simple loop we've created has a lot of complexity with the components. But just for fun, let's see what happens when we enhance our core game loop a little bit by adding enemy waves that we have to defeat instead of a singular enemy. And let's say the player has 5 health now. We didn't change much, right? It's still a very, very basic game, but look at all the additional components we need to build. We need to track the player health. We need to manage the enemy waves. We need to have a spawn system, We need to have a UI to display the wave and player health information. From a game design perspective, we need to think about the map size depending on how many enemies we'll be attacking at once. And this is just the beginning. There are so many more things you could add, but what's most important is we have a list of what we should be working on. It took me so long to understand why breaking down games into small components allows you to bulk up the game to be fun without getting overwhelmed and quitting. I know these steps seem like a lot of pre-work before even touching code, but trust me, by the end of step 4, you'll understand how these all work together and will make you a godlike developer. With that said, I think you're ready for the fun stuff.
Whoa. I don't even know how to make games. How am I supposed to polish one?
This is the beauty of this step. You finally get to learn how to make games, but the key secret is to polish whatever tutorial or course you are doing. Now, why would you polish something when you're learning? Well, because it's fucking cool. Take this square, for example. Now, take this square. Simply by adding glow, particles, and post-processing, you can take a boring tutorial series and turn it into something exciting that makes you want to come back to developing your game day after day. This step of polish was a turning point in my game dev journey because it unlocked the power to be able to learn and grow as a game developer. Now, I need you to stop and reflect on your life right now. Everything is about to change when I share this 4th step, because at the end of it, you will finally be a game developer and have finished your very first game. At the end, I'll tell you how I'm using all 4 of these steps to release my very first game on Steam, which you can wishlist right now. Link is in the description. Game Jam is that magical moment where you finally become a game developer. Essentially, you build a game around a theme over a set time period. The most common game jams run from 2 to 7 days long. If you have zero experience at all when you hit this step, I recommend finding a 7-day game jam. But if you have some experience and you're looking to finish that first game, a 48 to 72 hour game jam is perfect. This final step is so important for 3 reasons. The first is you have a set deadline. The second is you get feedback from other developers. The third is you actually completed a game. You are now a game developer. Now, before you get mad and say, why wasn't this step 1, 2, or 3? Let me tell you, completing a game jam is very difficult, and that's why on most game jams, over half of the participants don't ever finish. And the whole goal is to become a game developer, not someone who starts games and never finishes. So how do we actually finish the game? We focus on the core game loop we wrote above. The theme doesn't matter to us, as you can loosely fit in any theme into your game. Now, if you watch any game jam tip videos, they'll always say 2 things. 1, keep it simple, and 2, have a plan. Well, guess what? In step 1, we learned how to make simple game loops. In step 2, we learned how to take those game loops and break them down into components that need to be built out. We got all the tedious work out of the way before we even started the game jam, so you can dive right in when it starts. And finally, congratulations on achieving what most fail to do, making a video game. But this isn't where the journey ends. In fact, this is just the beginning. If you've made it this far, you deserve to know how to make your dream game. And this is the process I'm going through right now. You repeat steps 1 through 4. I've done 4 game jams right now, focusing on a specific feature on the game that I'm building out. And each time it becomes easier to complete a game, and you can achieve more and more in a smaller time period. In fact, the last game jam we completed was absolutely insane. I almost lost my art guy while we were making a game about a YouTuber. If you want to watch the video, click here and also subscribe.